In this video, I'm going to talk about the B camera that I use for my Sony FX6, the Sony a7S III. Here's the story. The a7S III is the B camera that I've chosen for my Sony FX6, and it has a few advantages and a few disadvantages when you're comparing it to the FX6. Now, when picking a B camera for your video project, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. For example, if you're doing a 2-camera interview and you're wanting the images to line up as much as possible with minimum post grading or color correcting or anything like that, and if you're using the Sony FX6, which I'm recording on right now, as your A camera, then the best B camera, in my opinion, would be another Sony FX6 with the same lens, with the same settings. That to me makes the most amount of sense in trying to get your images to line up as much as possible. However, if you're not doing a 2-camera interview and you just want another camera on set for other applications, for example, using it on a gimbal or just having an extra angle for whatever you're shooting, that's where you would then have the option to pick a different type of camera. So for me, I like to use the a7S III because it is smaller than the FX6, and that's one of its advantages. This makes it easier for me to put it onto a gimbal and balance it really quickly, and it also frees me up to not have to, if I wanted to use a gimbal on one of my video productions, strip down the FX6, which takes a bit of time, balance the gimbal, and then get the shots that I need, and then have to re-rig the camera again. That takes away a lot of time on set and is an inconvenience that I really don't want to have to deal with. So having that extra B camera, like the a7S III, really does help in those scenarios. And when you look at the a7S III and the FX6 on paper, a lot of the specs that both these cameras have do line up quite a bit. There are a few key features that the FX6 has that the a7S III doesn't have, and there are some features that the a7S III has that the FX6 doesn't have as well. So in both cameras, you do have S-Log3, which is great. They've both got S-Cinetone, which is a plus as well if you've got that quick turnaround and you don't want to be doing a lot of color grading in post. And they also shoot 4K 120 frames per second, and they also shoot in high quality codecs like the XAVC-I, but they're labeled different things on both cameras. In the FX6, it's XAVC-I, and then in the a7S III, it's XAVC-SI. So from my understanding, they're essentially the same thing. Now, some of the things that the FX6 has over the a7S III is, of course, internal variable ND. It also has waveform and shutter angle as well, whereas the a7S III doesn't have. Now for me, they are great features to have in the FX6, but they weren't deal breakers in purchasing the a7S III. Actually, I wasn't even aware that there was no waveform or shutter angle in the a7S III when I purchased it. I just assumed it was in the camera. I should have done my research, but once I found out it wasn't there, it wasn't a deal breaker enough for me to go, oh, I need to return this camera. You just learn to deal with it and get on with it. And of course, the ergonomics of the FX6 is different. I'm not going to go too much into that kind of stuff. I have done another video on things I like about the FX6, so feel free to check that out to get more of an in-depth look at different features that the FX6 has. Now, the main feature that the a7S III has that the FX6 doesn't have is IBIS, which is in-body image stabilization. And that is really handy if you do a lot of handheld shots. So having that in my toolkit in my B camera is really appealing for me. Also, because the a7S III is smaller than the FX6, it does make things a little bit more discreet when you're filming in public. Sometimes it can be a little bit of an inconvenience when people see that you've got a camera and you're filming, and then they come up to you and they start talking to you, asking you what you're filming, and stopping you from doing your job. A lot of the time when they see you with what looks like a photo camera, they won't really be asking you a lot of questions, which really does help in actually being able to do your job. And as mentioned before, the a7S III doesn't have an internal variable ND, but if I'm using the a7S III outside and I want to use an ND, I just use one of these Polar Pro variable NDs. It's a 2 to 5 stop, and I find that that does the job that I need it to do. It is a little bit inconvenient having to screw it on and then unscrew it, but it is what it is, and that's my workaround. And to extend the battery life on my a7S III, I do use the Sony battery grip, which doubles the battery life because it lets you put 2 batteries in here instead of just having 1 battery in the actual camera body. And I find that that does make the camera last quite a long time, and I haven't had it run out on a shoot yet. I'm not entirely sure exactly how long it lasts, but it does give me enough juice to get me through a whole shooting day. And if I do start to run low on battery, I can plug a USB-C battery brick into the camera, and that will extend my battery life as well. And finally, funny enough, I did purchase this camera to take photos with as well. Some people will call me crazy for thinking that this 12 megapixel sensor is enough for this day and age, but For me, 12 megapixels is enough for this day and age. A lot of the photos that I'm taking are just going to social media or to websites, and 12 megapixels in my experience has been enough for the types of projects that I'm taking photos for. I also take thumbnail photos with the camera, and I also take photos of family as well, and they don't need to be 24 megapixel, 40 megapixel, 100 megapixel. 12 megapixel, surprisingly enough, is enough. But that's just for me. I do realize that other people are taking photos that do get blown up onto billboards, or you need to crop in a lot. But just speaking from my personal experience and my personal needs, 12 megapixels is enough for what I need. So overall, I'm really happy with the a7S III as my B camera for my Sony FX6. There was one other camera that was in the running to be the B camera, and that's of course the Sony FX3. And I might do a video on why I didn't pick that camera in the future. Let me know in the comments if you want to see that. And that's the video. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel for more videos on video creation in the future.